The January wind cut through my thin coat like a blade, slipping past every layer of fabric and making my shoulders tense as I walked faster through the freezing night after leaving my late shift at Mercy West Hospital in Philadelphia. 3 years working as an emergency nurse had taught me to treasure the rare pockets of silence scattered between the whirlwinds of chaos. My apartment was 5 blocks away, a small loft with peeling paint and a heater that worked only when it felt like it, but it was mine, paid for with endless overtime shifts and dinners made of instant noodles. The streets of South Philly at 2 a.m. were silent as a held breath, and the only sound was the echo of my own footsteps against the old brick buildings rising around me, like mute soldiers guarding the darkness. I tightened my grip on the pepper spray in my hand, the one my father gave me before I left Pittsburgh for this city. For protection, sweetheart, he had said, worry carved into every line of his aging face. I had laughed back then. Now I understood. A few stray snowflakes fell, melting on my eyelashes like winter's quiet warning, but after 12 hours on my feet, my aching legs longed only for a bed to collapse into. 4 more blocks. Then a sound cracked through the stillness, sharp and dry, snapping between the brick walls like a whip slicing through air. A gunshot. My body froze for a heartbeat, instincts surging, caught between fleeing and going still like prey sensing a predator. 3 more followed, quick and precise, from the alley ahead of me. I should run. Call the police. Hide. Any of those would have been the rational choice. But my feet moved forward anyway. Skill and instinct overtook my fear. Someone might be bleeding. Brain cells begin to die after 4 minutes without oxygen. The golden hour. A stream of medical facts flared through my mind, pushing me toward the mouth of the alley instead of away from it. Is anyone hurt? My voice sounded, small against the vast quiet of the night. The smell of garbage, metal, and something far stronger hit me head-on. Blood. I turned on my phone flashlight. The weak beam revealed a nightmare. 2 bodies face down on the damp pavement, blood pooling beneath them, and a third man slumped against the brick wall, his hand pressed tightly to his side. He lifted his head when I approached, eyes glinting in the dark like an animal cornered. Stop. His voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Not the panic of a victim, but something else entirely. I should have listened. Something about him radiated danger. His posture steady despite the injury, his tailored coat now torn and soaked with blood, his gaze cold and calculating as he watched every move I made. But I had seen too many people die because help arrived too late. I'm a nurse, I said softly, slowing my steps, both hands raised to show I meant no harm. I can help. A black car slid to a stop at the mouth of the alley, headlights sweeping across us as if illuminating a stage. The wounded man stood, slowly, his face emerging from the shadows. He wasn't handsome in a movie star way, but in a sharper, more dangerous way. High cheekbones, deep-set eyes that seemed to swallow light, a strong jaw rough with stubble, and a thin scar slicing through his left eyebrow. Younger than I first thought, maybe in his early 30s, but with eyes that held years beyond that. Boss. A large man swung out of the passenger seat, gun drawn, his stare locking onto me before the barrel followed. Who is she? The injured man, their boss, apparently lifted 2 fingers. Lower it, Victor. She's a nurse. But the gun didn't lower. She saw everything. My heart thrashed in my chest like a bird beating against cage bars. This is it, I thought. I'm going to die in a filthy alley because I didn't know how to walk away. I said, lower it. The boss's voice dropped, quieter yet far more dangerous. The gun dipped. I exhaled shakily, realizing I had been holding my breath. You need a hospital, I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. Professional. That wound. No hospital. He cut me off, bracing himself against the wall to stay upright, his eyes never leaving mine. But I need you, right now. It wasn't a request. If you've stayed with me until this moment, if this chilling encounter has made your spine tingle and still you can't turn away, then please subscribe to our channel, tap like, and share this video so we can continue bringing you gripping, suspenseful stories every day. And, where are you watching from? Leave the name of your city or your country in the comments so I'll know how far this fateful night has traveled across the world. I nodded slightly, not out of trust but because I knew I had no other choice. If I didn't help, I feared I would witness yet another person bleed out and die. I stepped toward him slowly, his gaze locked on me, as if measuring every breath, every footfall. Victor took half a step back, gun still in hand but no longer aimed at me. I knelt beside the wounded man, slipped off my backpack, and fumbled with the zipper, my hands trembling. The basic first aid kit I always carried suddenly felt pathetically small. He shifted just enough for me to see the wound on his left side. Blood seeped steadily through the once white shirt, now stained a deep, spreading red. I cut the fabric open, gloves on, movements quick and practiced. The wound was deep but not wide, likely a bullet through soft tissue, no obvious broken bone or exposed organ. He didn't groan, didn't flinch, just watched me with a chilling calm that made goosebumps race across my skin. Under the harsh phone light, his skin looked even paler, a clear sign of blood loss. I pressed gauze hard against the wound. "You need stitches. I don't have enough tools here." "Your apartment is close?" His voice was rough but controlled. I hesitated, then nodded. 5 blocks. "But it's small. There's nothing. All we need is light and clean water." He leaned into Victor, signaling with a look. "We're going." The other two. I glanced at the unmoving bodies, blood gleaming black on the pavement. "Not your concern," Victor said flatly. A second man approached the bodies, opening the trunk and pulling out a tarp and a bag, preparing to handle the corpses as casually as clearing debris from a road. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet followed them out of the alley. A black SUV waited, rear door open. I was wedged between Victor and the wounded man as they eased him into the middle seat. The car smelled of leather, expensive cologne, and blood, thick enough to constrict my lungs. The engine purred to life. I kept pressure on the wound, watching his breathing, the color of his skin. No signs of shock yet, but his blood pressure was dropping. My free hand trembled, though I fought to steady my voice. "My name is Claire. Claire Bennett." He didn't answer right away. He turned from the window, studying me, and when he spoke his voice was softer but no less deliberate. "Michael Russo." The name hit me like a warning, not because I recognized it, but because of the way he said it. Clear, sharp, carrying a legacy, and an unspoken threat. The SUV turned onto my street, tires gliding over pavement bathed in weak yellow light. "Red brick building, 2nd floor." I pointed, still holding the gauze firmly. Victor lifted Michael out of the car, as if he weighed nothing. I hurried ahead, unlocking the door, turning on every light in the cramped apartment. The tiny kitchen, the worn sofa, the fold-out bed in the corner, all of it looked exposed under the fluorescent bulbs. Victor set Michael onto the chair. I scrubbed my hands in the sink, grabbed my medical supplies from the cabinet. Not hospital grade, but I had sutures, needles, antiseptic, and gauze saved from countless night shifts. "You'll need at least 10 stitches, I murmured, exhaustion threading through my voice. Michael gave a small nod. "Do it." I injected a local anesthetic and began stitching with full concentration. My hands worked with steady precision, each knot firm and clean. Even without an operating room or surgical lights, I performed as if I were back in the hospital, forcing myself to separate emotion from the truth that I was stitching up a man who had just walked away from a killing. Michael didn't cry out, didn't tense. He only watched me, silent and sharp-eyed, as if he were the one assessing me. When I tied the final suture, I cleaned the edges of the wound, applied fresh bandages. "You need rest, a clean environment, and no strenuous movement," I said mechanically. Michael straightened, pulled out his phone, and typed a short message. Victor stood by the window, scanning the street below. Silence settled like a heavy blanket. Then Michael spoke, his voice low but unmistakably clear. "I owe you a life, and I do not forget a debt like that." I stared at him, my mind caught between fear and something far more unsettling. The strongest feeling rising in me was not regret, but the quiet, unmistakable awareness that something had begun, something I did not yet have a name for. I stood frozen for a few seconds, my hands still stained with the dry traces of his blood, my heart pounding restlessly inside my chest. It wasn't fear that held me still, but the sudden realization that one night, one choice, had pulled me into a world with no exit. Michael was still sitting on the worn sofa in my tiny apartment, his gaze cutting through everything I had yet to say. He was unlike any patient I had ever treated. No panic, no gratitude, no groaning. only control, complete and effortless. Victor glanced at me, then stepped forward and handed Michael another black shirt pulled neatly from a bag he carried, still pressed, as if fresh from the store. I didn't ask why they had brought all this with them. I didn't want to know. While Michael changed, I turned away and pretended to busy myself rinsing my suturing tools in the small basin. Under the cold light, the needle shimmered like a quiet reminder of what had just unfolded. When I turned back, he was already dressed, standing by the window and looking down at the street. He stood tall and straight, broad-shouldered, though still heavy with blood loss. I handed him a small packet of painkillers. "You shouldn't take these on an empty stomach, but I'm guessing you don't plan on eating tonight." He took them, his mouth lifting in a faint, fleeting smile. "Are you always this cold?" "I don't usually smile while stitching up bullet wounds," I answered dryly. Michael nodded as if he understood perfectly, then lowered himself into the chair again, his movements slower, more deliberate. Silence settled into the room like dust. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound landing between the beats of my own unsteady heartbeat. Then he spoke, his voice low and calm. "Do you know who you saved that night?" I met his eyes and shook my head. "I know I saved a wounded man, and I know I might lose my job, get arrested, or even be killed because of it, but I couldn't turn away." Michael didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his coat and placed a black business card on the coffee table. No name, only a single phone number engraved in silver. "If you ever need help, anytime, call that number." I didn't touch it. "I don't want to be involved in your world." "You already are." His voice was gentle, not threatening, yet the words felt like a lock sliding shut, sealing off any path back to the life I knew. Victor finally spoke. "We don't have much time. We should go." Michael rose, this time steadier on his feet. I handed him a small packet of gauze and antiseptic. "Change the dressing, every day. Watch for infection. If you have a fever, redness, or pus, you need to go to a hospital immediately." Michael accepted the supplies, nodding once. Very professional. "You truly are something rare, Claire Bennett." I didn't answer. I stood rigid, gripping the edge of the table. They left the way they came without a trace, without a slammed door, without blood left behind. When I was alone again, standing in the center of the dimly lit room, I realized my hands were trembling. I turned on every light in the apartment and stared at the black card resting quietly on the table. A part of me wanted to throw it away immediately. Another part couldn't look away. There was something about that man I couldn't ignore. Not just his eyes or his injury, but his presence. A frightening calm, a courteous coldness, and something else unnamed, hovering just out of reach. I sank into the chair, leaned back, and closed my eyes. But in my mind, the alley replayed again and again the gunshots, the blood, Victor's stare, and Michael's final words, "I owe you a life, and I do not forget such things." And I knew that men like him, they never spoke lightly. 3 days passed after that night, yet my mind remained stuck in the moment Michael Russo's eyes met mine for the last time before he disappeared behind the door. I scrubbed the last traces of blood off the floor, packed away my medical supplies, folded the sutures and gauze, as if trying to erase every sign, but the heaviness in my chest wouldn't lift. I went to work as usual, treating accident victims, fainting spells, asthma attacks, but my focus drifted like a sailboat with no wind, pushed by unseen currents far from the shore. I told no one. Not my coworkers, not my supervisors, not even my father who called faithfully each week. I tucked the black card inside an old box of patient charts, not tearing it, not dialing it, just hiding it. And I thought that would be the end of it. Until Saturday afternoon, when I returned from the hospital and stepped into the hallway of the second floor to find a man standing in front of my door. He didn't look like Victor. This one was tall and lean, dressed in a wrinkle-free black suit, carrying a long cream-colored box tied with a deep blue ribbon. He smiled politely as I approached. "Miss Claire Bennett?" I nodded slowly, my fingers wrapped tightly around my keys. He bowed slightly and offered the box. "Mr. Russo sends his gratitude." And an invitation. I didn't take it immediately. An invitation to what? A private dinner at his residence. "A car will pick you up at 7 o'clock this evening should you accept." I stayed silent. The man maintained his polite smile, though his eyes were sharp and expectant. I finally accepted the box. It was lighter than I expected. Inside my apartment, I placed it on the table, untied the ribbon, and lifted the lid. Inside was a wine-colored silk dress, exquisitely tailored, the fabric soft as water slipping through fingers. A small handwritten note lay on top, the penmanship masculine, slightly slanted but neat. Tonight. No pressure. Just a thank you. M.R. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dress resting on white tissue paper. A part of me wanted to call and refuse immediately. Another part wanted to know what kind of man Michael Russo was when he wasn't bleeding in an alley. When the clock struck 6:30, I rose. My hair twisted neatly into a knot, a touch of pale lipstick, the dress fitting me well enough to feel elegant but not exposed. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't wearing scrubs. Not hospital shoes, not hiding. At exactly 7, a long black car pulled up outside the building. The driver said nothing, only nodded and opened the door. The city thinned as we drove toward Chestnut Hill, where large homes sat behind iron gates and carefully pruned trees. Michael's home wasn't like the others, not too large, not ostentatious, but with a quiet gravity that made it feel separate from the rest of the world. The oak door opened before I could knock. Victor stood there, now in a tailored suit instead of leather. He stepped aside with a small bow. "Please come in, Miss Bennett." The scent of polished wood, wine, and soft jazz floated through the air. Wooden floors gleamed, a crystal chandelier above casting gentle rather than dazzling light, each detail chosen not to overwhelm but to make one feel seen. Michael appeared at the top of the staircase, no longer in blood-stained clothes but in a charcoal suit, black tie, hair combed cleanly, the wound hidden as if it never existed. He descended step by step with the ease of someone who belonged on a stage. When he reached me, he offered a smile, the first I had seen, that carried no calculation. "You came, and I must say, the dress suits you far better than I imagined." I didn't have time to respond, because all I could think was why my heart was beating so fast when he looked at me as if I were something worth remembering, not just the woman who stitched 10 of his wounds on a winter night. Michael guided me into the dining room, where warm golden light glowed from small overhead fixtures and reflected off a long walnut table set with understated elegance. The table was set for 2, not extravagant, but every detail deliberate. Polished silverware, thin crystal glasses, softly burning scented candles, and in the center, a vase of white tulips, simple but beautiful. He held out my chair, then sat opposite me. The first course arrived immediately, as though each moment had been rehearsed. "I didn't know your favorite foods, so I asked the chef to prepare a few simple things," Michael said, his voice light, almost casual, as though we were old friends meeting after years apart. I only nodded, feeling as though I had stepped into a reality slightly detached from my own. We didn't speak much through the first course. I heard every small sound, the soft slice of a knife on porcelain, the gentle clink of a glass set down, the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. Michael was perfectly composed, never staring too long, never too intently, yet never distant. By the time the main dish arrived, a plate of seared salmon with lemon sauce and asparagus, he set his utensils down, laced his fingers, and looked directly at me. "I know you have questions, and I owe you some answers." I didn't speak, only waited. "That night," he said, his voice deepening, "I wasn't the victim of a random ambush. It was a targeted attempt, and not the first one." My heartbeat tightened, though I kept my expression calm. "I assumed as much." He gave a small nod, as if appreciating my composure. "Do you know why I refused to go to a hospital?" "Because of records, because of evidence, because the police would find you." "Exactly." He tilted his head, studying me more closely. "I'm not just a businessman. I run part of what people call the underworld. But I'm not the kind of man you read about in sensational headlines. I don't traffic people, I don't deal drugs, I don't run gambling rings. I manage finances, real estate, and a few other things, in the gray spaces of the law." I said nothing. His words didn't surprise me, but hearing them aloud squeezed something tight inside my chest. "So, I saved a crime boss?" "You saved a man trying to pull his foot out of the mire he created for himself." He poured more wine into my glass, the liquid catching the light like shattered glass. "I don't expect your approval. I just want you to know I understand exactly who I am and why you're here." And why invite me to dinner? Is this part of your network? Michael let out a quiet laugh, not mocking but tinged with something like regret. No, this is genuine gratitude. You saved my life in a filthy alley when you could have walked away. I don't forget that. And I'm also curious. Curious? About a woman who chose to stay instead of retreat. A nurse who knows how to stitch a wound and doesn't tremble at the sight of death. A woman who didn't ask who I was, only how deep the injury went. I lifted my glass, the warmth rising in my cheeks not entirely from the wine. I didn't know how to respond to being seen so clearly. I was just doing my job. And not everyone does their job with your kind of courage. Silence passed between us again, but it wasn't tense anymore. Something fragile had formed, a shared breath, a quiet understanding. I won't force you into anything, Michael said, his tone serious for the first time. But if one day you ever need anything, or simply want to step away from the world for a moment, I'll still be here. I nodded slowly, not a promise, not a refusal. Dinner ended with a light dessert vanilla ice cream drizzled with berry sauce, but I barely tasted it. When Michael walked me to the car, he didn't touch me, only watched as I sat down inside. The door closed softly, and the car pulled away, leaving him standing beneath the warm yellow lights, surrounded by a yard where the last patches of snow clung stubbornly to the ground. I had no idea what I was stepping into, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Tonight, something had shifted forever. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, though I had barely slept at all. In my mind, the dinner with Michael Russo replayed like a slow-moving reel, not only the confession of who he truly was, but the way he looked at me when he said it, an unguarded gaze that felt as if it were pulling me out of myself. I tried to return to my old rhythm, slipping into my white coat, tying my hair back, stepping into the emergency room where people needed only my hands and my steadiness, not the person behind them. But the feeling of being watched began on the second day after that evening. Not overtly, just a shadow moving in a window's reflection, footsteps matching mine as I left the hospital, a black car idling on a corner where I had never seen one before. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, leftover fear from crossing paths with someone like Michael. But on the third day, when I came home from work, I found a cream-colored gift box with a silver ribbon sitting neatly in front of my apartment door. No doorbell, no knock. Only the box, quiet and waiting, like a question suspended between reality and fear. I carried it inside, sat at the table, and stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved, lined with black velvet. A delicate silver necklace lay within it, the pendant shaped like a swallow with open wings, exquisite, beautiful, in a quiet way. There was a small card tucked beside it, only a few handwritten words, a reminder that you are still protected. No signature, but I knew it was from Michael. I looked at the necklace, then closed the box again. That night, I didn't turn on the bedside lamp. I lay awake listening to every sound, the wind slipping through the window frame, the muffled footsteps in the hallway. The sense of someone being closer to me than I ever realized became more tangible than any threat could have been. No danger in words, but no comfort either. The next morning at the hospital, I told myself I had imagined everything until I saw a man in a black suit standing at the far end of a hallway where no patients were. He said nothing, only met my eyes for a single second before turning and disappearing through the emergency stairwell door. He wasn't a patient, he wasn't staff, and I wasn't dreaming. I called Michael. I didn't text. I needed to hear his voice. The phone rang twice. "I know," he said before I could speak. "Why are they following me?" "It isn't they. It is me. My people." I stood still in the on-call room, caught between anger and an unsettling sense of relief. "You think I can't protect myself?" "I think not everyone wants to protect you the way I do." His voice wasn't cold nor arrogant, but carried something uncertain, something almost honest. I didn't answer. I drew in a long breath. Being watched is not the way to earn my trust. I don't need you to trust me. I need you safe. I hung up before he could say anything else. That night I put the gift box in a drawer, locked it, and slipped the pepper spray under my pillow. But when I turned off the lights, I remembered the faint smile Michael had worn at the dinner table, the sound of his voice when he said he was curious about me. It wasn't exactly flirtation. It sounded like someone living on the edge of shadow and light who suddenly realized someone else was standing there too, unsure of which direction to go. And I began to wonder whether I was moving toward the light or stepping deeper into the world where Michael had lingered far too long. I didn't call him back after that conversation. I didn't text. I didn't respond to the second gift left at my door 2 days later, a soft leather-bound book with a single passage marked inside. There are people we cannot come close to, yet cannot walk away from. No author, no signature, only silence stretching like a thread connecting two people living in opposite worlds. I read that passage 10 times in one night. At work, I functioned like the steady hand of a clock, never missing a beat. But inside, my heart had begun to fall out of rhythm. Sometimes, during long shifts, I found myself staring out of the window, waiting for a familiar silhouette to appear. That was when I realized I was drifting, not being pulled but choosing to drift. One late afternoon, after finishing my shift and waiting for the bus in a light mist of rain, a familiar black car pulled up beside the curb. The window lowered. It was Michael. His eyes were deep. The sharpness of our first meeting softened, as if he had set down a shield he had carried for years. "Get in, Claire." I hesitated for only a breath before opening the door. The warmth inside the car wrapped around me, easing the winter chill on my skin. We didn't speak the entire drive. Only the soft swish of the wipers and the low hum of jazz from the speakers filled the space. The car turned onto the forested road leading to the familiar house. I didn't ask why we were going there. I knew the reason no longer needed words. Inside, I slipped off my coat and set my bag down, moving by memory rather than instruction. The kitchen still held its amber glow, the quiet, steady air unchanged. Michael poured wine, offered me a glass. I took it but didn't drink. His gaze found mine, steady and unhurried. "I've been thinking a lot about whatever this is between us," he said, his voice low, like the slow notes of a piano. "I'm not a good man, Claire, but I've never felt the need to prove myself to anyone. Until you." I said nothing. Every rehearsed denial or defense dissolved in the weight of the moment. "I don't even know what's real between us," I whispered. "I just know that since that night, I don't see the world the same way." Michael stepped closer, not fast, as if he were afraid to break something fragile suspended in the quiet between us. When only a breath separated us, he stopped. His eyes searched mine for a permission I hadn't spoken. I didn't step back. I didn't step forward either. I simply closed my eyes. And when his lips brushed mine, so light I almost wasn't sure it was real, I felt every piece of logic I had carried shatter softly at my feet. The kiss wasn't urgent or claiming. It was a confession whispered without words, something fragile balanced on the edge between right and wrong, between what should be forgotten and what refuses to be let go. When he pulled back, his hand still resting softly against my cheek, his eyes holding mine as if seeing something beautiful hidden within chaos, I understood that I was no longer standing outside this story. I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I thought things might remain calm for a while, that I could continue living 2 separate lives, one at the hospital, where I was Claire Bennett, the quiet, competent emergency nurse, and one in that other world, where I was the woman Michael Russo looked at in a way no one ever had. But I was wrong. On a Tuesday morning, while changing after a night shift, a knock on the locker room door startled me. I turned to see a man in a gray trench coat leaning against the frame. Something in his face put me immediately on guard. His eyes were sharp as a blade. Not angry, just experienced. The kind of eyes that had witnessed too many lies. "Miss Bennett?" I nodded, gripping the strap of my bag tighter. "I'm Detective Collins. I'm investigating the shooting on South Bailey Street last week. We need a few minutes to talk." I didn't ask how he knew I was involved. I didn't ask how he got my name. I simply nodded. We sat in a small cafe near the hospital. Collins didn't order anything, just rested his arms on the table and studied me as if he could read every subtle shift of expression. "I'm not here to accuse you," he began, his voice rough with the fatigue of too many unresolved cases. "I just want to understand why a highly regarded nurse like you was near a scene with 2 dead men. No police report, no bodies, no witnesses." I kept my voice steady. "I heard noises. When I got there, no one was around. I thought I imagined it, He was silent for a moment. Then he pulled a photo from his coat pocket. It was me, standing at my apartment door, speaking with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a long coat. Michael. The picture was taken from a distance, but clear enough that I couldn't deny it. You know him. Not a question, a statement. I set the coffee cup down, untouched. I don't know who he is. His name is Michael Russo. Are you sure you don't know that name? I lifted my head, looking straight into his eyes for the first time. If I did, would that make me a criminal? Collins let out a small laugh, not pleased but resigned, the laugh of someone older watching someone younger cut off her own escape. No, but it makes you a key witness. And Claire, I don't think you understand what you're standing in the middle of. Michael Russo isn't just a businessman. He runs a network we've been tracking for nearly a decade. And for the first time, he's showing a weakness. My chest tightened, not because he was wrong, but because he was right. I didn't do anything for him. I just stitched a wound, and let him into your home, and had dinner with him, and accepted gifts that never came with receipts. I didn't answer. Collins leaned closer. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to take you a chance, protect yourself, become a witness, give us information. We will keep you safe. We can even move you out of the city. I looked at him as if he had asked me to trade my heart for a sworn statement. I have nothing to give you. You are putting yourself in the line of fire, Claire. And when this all blows open, no one will be able to save you. Not Michael Russo, not anyone. Collins stood, placed a business card on the table. When you're ready to live your life as a normal person again, call me. Then he walked away, leaving me alone among the empty tables and the pale morning light. I picked up the card. His name was printed in simple black ink, nothing flashy. I folded it and slipped it into my bag, my heart heavy as stone. I knew I was being forced to choose sides, but I never imagined that whatever existed between me and Michael would make me the one vulnerability the world could see, and that terrified me more than the gun that had once been pointed at me in that dark alley. I did not call Detective Collins. I did not tell anyone about that meeting, but after that day, I could no longer sleep through the night. Every small sound in the hallway, every stranger passing by my window made me flinch. I began sleeping with the lights on, dropping all night shifts, and declining every invitation from coworkers. I lived strung tight like a wire, afraid of being pulled deeper into Michael's world, yet unable to shake the hollow ache I felt each day I didn't hear from him. A week later, close to midnight, while I sat curled up by the window staring down at the street, my phone vibrated. It was Michael. He didn't ask if I was all right, didn't circle around the point. His voice was low, steady, unmistakably firm. Pack your things. I'm taking you out of there tonight. I was silent for a few seconds, not out of hesitation, but because I knew that once I walked out the door with him, there would be no turning back. Where? A cabin in Vermont. Safe, quiet. No one will find you there. I asked nothing more. Within 20 minutes, I had stuffed a few sets of clothes, documents, medication, and my favorite book into a backpack. No notes left behind, no messages sent to anyone. When I stepped out of the building, a familiar SUV was already waiting. Michael sat inside, wearing the same dark clothes as always, but when he saw me, something in his eyes softened. We said little on the drive. The city fell away behind the glass, its yellow lights fading like memories shutting their eyes. When the streets gave way to forests and snow blanketed both sides of the road, I felt my body loosen for the first time in weeks. The cabin lay tucked deep among the trees, its dark wood and steep roof heavy with ice, but inside it was unexpectedly warm. There was a wood-burning fireplace, the gentle scent of burning pine, a small kitchen stocked with spices, and a bookshelf placed beside a wide window overlooking the pines. Michael stepped in first and flipped the switch, the amber lights pushing the darkness back as he turned toward me. This is the only place where I can guarantee your peace. I entered, set my bag down, and said nothing. I sat in the armchair by the window, staring at the firelight flickering in the hearth. Michael returned from the kitchen with 2 cups of hot tea, handed me one, then sat in the chair across from me. Detective Collins came to see me, I said softly. I know. He wants me to be a witness. He wants to take me away from you. And you didn't go. I nodded. For the first time, his eyes showed an emotion he didn't try to conceal. He left his chair, came to sit beside me. I have nothing to promise you, no future, no certainty. Only the truth that every time I think of you, I feel there's still a part of me the darkness hasn't swallowed. I looked at him, a quiet rising inside me like the surface of a lake just after the wind. Porch, the pine branches, the wooden steps leading into the forest behind the cabin. Michael and I spent more time indoors, where the fire burned steadily, and the small kitchen became the warmest place in the house. We adjusted to a rhythm that held no sirens, no emergency calls at midnight, no red and blue lights slicing through the curtains. Only the soft whistle of wind and the gentle hum of classical music from the old radio each morning. One colder night, as I sat on the sofa with a blanket around me reading, Michael came from the study holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. He set one before me and sat beside me, silent at first before he spoke. Have you ever wondered why I ended up in this life? I looked up at him, placing the book on my lap. He wasn't looking at me, but at the fire, his features shadowed by the glow. I didn't answer. I knew his question wasn't one meant for a response. It was the beginning of something long locked away. I grew up in South Brooklyn, he said, his voice low and steady, as if reciting a story worn down by time. A poor neighborhood, damp walls, leaking roofs, winters so cold my mother once burned the living room chairs to keep us warm. My father worked construction, sometimes at the docks. My mother, she didn't have time for a job. She spent her days making sure my father didn't drink all our money or spend it on women. I sat very still, listening as if watching him shed armor piece by piece. I had a brother, Louis, 4 years younger. He loved to draw. He'd sketch on walls, on paper bags, anything he could find. When I was 13, one night he got lost walking home from school. A group of older boys cornered him, stole his lunch money, and beat him so badly he needed 8 stitches on his forehead. When I found him in the hospital, he asked me something I've never forgotten. Why am I worth hurting? Michael's voice tightened. I didn't have an answer, but I promised myself that no one would ever hurt my family again, and I kept that promise. My grip tightened around the warm mug, the heat seeping into my skin, while a cold ache spread through my chest. Louis died at 16, Michael continued, as though memory had become an unstoppable tide. Bone cancer. We had no insurance, no money, and the doctors said there was nothing more to do. I stayed by his bed for 23 nights, and when he closed his eyes, I knew the world would never be fair. Justice did not belong to poor children. He lifted his eyes to mine. That was when I decided. If the world had no place for me, then I would carve out my own one, where I controlled everything, one where I was the law. I placed my hand over his, overwhelmed by emotions without names. And from then on, you became the Michael Russo everyone fears? I became the version of myself that could survive, he said, nodding slightly. But then I met you. Someone who didn't ask about my past, didn't investigate, didn't judge. You just placed your hand over a wound and said, "You need stitches." And maybe that was the first time I didn't feel like a monster. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. No words needed. Sometimes love is not forgiving the past, but listening to it, touching it gently, letting it dissolve into the shared breath between 2 people. That night, snow still drifted outside the cabin, but inside, a heart opened, and another quietly stepped in. I woke around 3 in the morning to a strange sound outside the cabin, not loud but sharp enough to tighten every muscle in my body. At first, I thought it was a branch snapping under the weight of snow, but then it came again, footsteps compressing deep snow, and a faint rattle at the back window as if someone were testing its strength. I shot up, my heart hammering, eyes scanning the dim room. Michael wasn't beside me. I understood instantly that something was wrong. I ran from the bed, my bare feet sliding across the cold wooden floor, and hurried down the short hallway to the living room. The fireplace still glowed, but not enough to illuminate the whole room. I saw Michael behind the sofa, gun drawn and cocked, his eyes razor-sharp, fixed on the front door. He motioned for silence and pointed to the floor, telling me to get down. I obeyed without a breath of hesitation. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as the air grew thick and brittle like a glass pane about to shatter. Then the front door exploded inward, wood breaking in splinters. 2 men in black, masks covering their faces, rifles in hand, stormed in with the confidence of those who knew the terrain. Michael didn't fire immediately. He stepped back, using the wall as cover, waiting for the exact moment one of them crossed by the fireplace before pulling the trigger. The gunshot cracked through the cabin, ripping apart the fragile quiet of the woods. The first man fell instantly. The second jerked in. Surprise, firing wildly into the wall, sending wood chips flying and knocking a vase off the shelf. I held my head down, pressing myself to the floor, feeling cold air sweep across my skin but too terrified to move. Michael leaned out and fired again, this time hitting the man's leg and sending him crashing down with a cry. But before I could take a breath, pounding erupted at the back door. Another intruder. Michael signaled for me to crawl behind the kitchen counter, where he kept a metal box of weapons and a first aid kit. I didn't think I simply obeyed. He moved fast toward the back door, crouching behind the cabinet, gripping his gun. The door slammed open, and a third man charged in. This time Michael didn't shoot immediately. They grappled. I heard fists landing on flesh, objects breaking, a low snarl from two men locked in a fight too brutal for the cramped room. Finally, Michael slammed the man into a wooden shelf, the attacker collapsing with his head striking the table, edge, falling still. The cabin fell silent again, but this silence was the aftermath of violence, thick with gunpowder, blood, smoke, and fear. I stepped out from behind the counter, my hands trembling, my bare feet catching on shards of glass and pieces of wood. Michael looked at me, his body streaked with blood that wasn't his, eyes bright and alert. "Are you hurt?" I nodded, though my voice caught in my throat. "Who were they?" "Gallows men. He knows we're here. You said this place was safe." It was. Michael moved quickly, checking the pulse of the surviving attacker, then binding his hands with rope from the cabinet. "We can't stay here." I looked around the cabin, the one place that had felt like the most peaceful refuge I'd had in years, now scarred by violence. I knew he was right. Michael pulled out a satellite phone, dialing quickly. "Initiate relocation plan. 8 hours from now. Bring transport to checkpoint number 5. He hung up and turned toward me. For the first time, I saw in his eyes not anger or calculation, but genuine fear. "I can't let you be dragged into this any further. I have to get you out." But I didn't step back. I took his hand, holding it tightly not to prove anything, but because I knew that if I didn't stay tonight, I might never have another chance to say that I chose him, in the midst of uncertainty and danger. And in that moment, standing among broken wood, scattered glass, and the cold wind slipping through the shattered door, I understood more clearly than ever that love does not grow in safe places. It takes root in the moments when we face the most fragile parts of ourselves. I did not leave the cabin with Michael right after the attack. He said we needed time to clear the traces, destroy anything that could be tracked, and make sure we could leave without being followed. The hours that followed were a blur of focused, deliberate movements. Michael changed his shirt, washed, the blood from his hands, checked phones, radios, maps, while I gathered only what was essential into 2 light backpacks. The small kitchen still held a faint trace of smoke now that the gunpowder scent had begun to fade, but tension clung to the air like a thin veil of fog settling over everything. When night fell, we burned every unnecessary document, smashed the phone's SIM cards, and erased all digital footprints. Close to midnight, Michael pulled me down beside him on the sofa near the hearth where the fire still glowed but had softened into a steady amber light. He handed me a small glass of wine and held my other hand, as if trying to keep hold of something fragile in the storm closing in around us. "I can't let you come with me," he said, his voice rough, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Tonight you almost died. If you stay, worse will come." I didn't answer right away. I tightened my grip on his hand and looked directly into the eyes that had always made me equal, parts curious and afraid. "But if I leave, I lose something I never knew I could have, someone who makes me feel seen, trusted, chosen." Michael held my gaze for a long time. It wasn't the look of a man burdened by responsibility or chained to duty. It was the gaze of someone who had built a life on control, now confronting the one thing he could not command, a woman choosing to stay, not out of obligation, not because of a debt, but because of her heart. "I don't know everything about you," I continued, "but I know what it feels like when you hold my hand, when you protect me, when you refuse to leave me alone in the dark. I choose that even if it isn't safe." Michael bowed his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. I couldn't tell if it was emotion or a cold draft slipping through the cracks of the door. He set his glass down and turned to me, cupping my face with both hands in a slow, deliberate gesture, as if every touch needed to be considered. I tried to keep my distance, Claire. I thought that if I let you go, you would get to live the life you had before. But every night I thought, if you disappear from my world, I will have nowhere to return to. No light left to believe in. I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling the faint tremor in his body. Neither of us rushed toward the kiss. It came naturally, like wind passing through the trees and releasing a leaf that had been waiting all season to fall. His lips brushed mine gently, slowly, without urgency, without calculation, merely an acknowledgement that whatever tomorrow held, tonight we were here, together. We didn't go to bed like people overtaken by desire. We lay beside each other beneath a thick fur blanket, inside the cabin where everything had begun and would soon end. I listened to the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady and strong, the pulse of a life imperfect yet real down to every scar. Before I drifted to sleep, I turned to him one last time. Firelight flickered across the bridge of his nose, his cheekbones, the faint parting of his lips, as if he were dreaming of something no one could name. I knew everything could change come morning. We could leave the cabin, be hunted, be torn apart. But in that moment, I knew my choice had been made, and this time, I would not step back. The morning after our first night truly belonging to each other, the snow fell even harder. The white light outside the window made the inside of the cabin feel quieter, as if the world beyond had been sealed shut by some invisible door. I woke to the sound of running water at the sink and the soft aroma of coffee drifting through the air. I wrapped myself in a wool sweater and stepped out of the bedroom, finding him standing near the stove, staring through the frost-covered window with a distant expression. "Any news? Any news?" I asked, my voice husky from sleep. Michael turned, shook his head. "No one trailing us. For now. But I don't know how long that will last." I nodded, poured myself coffee. We sat across from each other in a silence that felt more intimate than any whispered confession. Near noon, when I stepped out onto the porch to gather some firewood, the satellite phone on the table began to vibrate. Michael picked it up, looked at the number, and froze for a moment. "It's Collins," he said quietly. My chest tightened instantly. He looked at me with a gaze that was half question, half warning. I nodded. "I'll take it." Michael handed me the phone and stepped away, giving me whatever space I might need. Detective Collins's voice came through the line the moment I lifted it. "Claire, I think you know why I'm calling. Did you find us?" "No, but we apprehended one of the men involved in the cabin attack the other night," he talked, including the fact that Michael didn't kill him when he had the chance. I didn't know whether it was a trap or the truth. I said nothing. Collins continued, "I'm not calling to make declarations about guilt or innocence. I just want you to understand that we are very close now. And this time, I don't think you can avoid the legal consequences if you stay by his side. I haven't helped his organization, but you know about it, and you're shielding him." "I'm not shielding him. I'm not betraying him." Collins exhaled heavily. "Claire, you have a life. You're a good nurse. You could go back to your work, have a future, have something normal. But you need to leave him. Right now. If not, when this collapses, and it will, you will go down with him. No one is immune to fallout." I swallowed hard, staring out at the forest buried beneath thick snow. "If I leave, can you promise he won't be railroaded? That he'll get a fair hearing? Not just be a name on a list they want wiped clean?" "I can't guarantee that, but I can guarantee your safety. And if you help us, what you say will matter in his file." I understood. Collins knew how to play by the rules, but also how to use people as pieces on a board. I hung up without promising anything. Michael returned, looking at me with a question he didn't voice. "What did he say?" "He said if I stay, there won't be a way back." Michael said nothing, only set his hand gently on my shoulder, a touch that carried the weight of everything neither of us could say aloud. I stood there, feeling my heart pulled in two directions. One path led back to my old life, clean, safe, predictable, where I could heal others and maybe heal myself. The other path led forward into darkness, a future uncertain and steep, but shared with Michael, a man who promised nothing except that he would stand beside me, and I knew the time for hesitation was ending. I did not sleep that night, not out of fear, but because Collins's words kept circling through my thoughts. They were not quite threats, not quite advice. They were needles pressing into the divide between what I used to believe was right and what I now felt. Michael didn't ask, but he knew. He always knew when my silence stretched too long, when I sat curled by the hearth, staring at ashes gone cold, eyes unblinking. The next morning, he led me to the small clearing behind the cabin, where a narrow trail descended toward the valley. It was cold but still, the wind gone. Snow reached our ankles. Michael handed me a cup of hot tea, his fingers brushing mine lightly, as if substituting for the words he could not speak. "Claire," he said slowly, "I know you're standing between two choices." I looked at him directly, for the first time in days hiding nothing. "I don't want to betray you, Michael. But I can't keep running. I'm a citizen. I'm a nurse. I can't become someone who helps a wanted man disappear, even if I love him." He nodded, not angry, not wounded, only carrying a quiet sadness in his eyes, as though he had seen this coming long before I had. "So what do I do?" "I don't know. But if you want me to stay, you have to give me a reason. Not with feelings, with action. I need to see you choose real freedom, not a life spent hiding. I need to believe you want to leave that world behind." Michael was silent for a long moment before turning to face the trees. You know, freedom was never something I thought about. Growing up, I only knew survival, protection, control. Not living, not really. Not until you. I stepped closer, taking his hand, cold and trembling. "I don't want to turn you into someone else. I just want you to live as the man I've seen, the part of you that saved me from fear, that made me believe there is tenderness even in the places where everything feels lost." Michael faced me again, his eyes stripped of all defenses. "If I surrender, I'll be imprisoned, maybe for many years. Maybe I'll never come back the same. But if you do nothing," I whispered, "then the rest of our lives will be spent running, nameless, futureless, without peace." A light breeze moved through the trees, shaking snow from the branches onto my back, sending a chill down my spine, but I didn't move. I held his gaze, waiting. And in that moment, I saw the battle inside him, not a fight between right and wrong, but between the old instincts carved into his bones and the new longing just beginning to take shape in a corner of his heart he hadn't dared name. "If you stay," Michael said quietly, "I won't let you live your life on the run. I will find a way to make this right, to make myself legal, even if it means confessing, negotiating, or trading my life for a chance at something new." I didn't cry, but my chest tightened painfully, because I understood the weight of that promise. It wasn't just sacrifice, it was stepping away from everything he had ever known, everything he believed was necessary to survive. I nodded. "If you do that, I won't leave. I won't turn you in. But I need to see you fight, not flee." We stood in the quiet woods, the sound of our hearts loud enough to feel like echoes, and from that moment, the choice had been made. Neither of us stayed out of fear, neither moved forward solely out of love. We chose each other because we were brave enough to face ourselves. Imprisonment or freedom, in the end, are only two sides of the same truth. A person is only truly free when they dare to live according to what they believe is right, no matter the cost. We returned to the cabin as the sun slipped behind the mountains, the late light filtering through snow-laden branches in blurred streaks across the cold ground. Michael opened the door for me and stepped inside first, but I paused on the threshold, my hand still gripping the doorknob as if holding onto an invisible boundary. He turned, his eyes asking why I had not come in. I looked at him steadily, for the first time without hesitation. "I won't step through this door unless we make everything clear right now." Michael stood still, not surprised, but not at ease either. He nodded and moved aside, and I closed the door behind us as we stood in the same room that had been our final refuge less than 2 days earlier. I didn't circle around the point. "If you want me to stay, not just tonight, not just tomorrow, but truly stay, then you have to change." Michael said nothing, though his hands tightened slightly. "I know you can't shed your past in a single night, and I'm not naive enough to think love alone is enough, but I will not walk beside a man who sees the world only through guns and shadows. I've seen another version of you, the man who kept me alive, who spoke about his brother with a grief that shook him, who touched me as if I was the last thing he could still believe in. I love that man, and only that man." My voice wasn't raised, but each word pierced straight through the armor he'd worn his whole life. Michael stepped closer, slowly, leaving just enough space that I wouldn't feel cornered. And if I don't change, I lifted my chin, my eyes steady on his, then I will leave. Not because I stop loving you, but because I refuse to live inside choices I never get to make. I won't live as a shadow behind you, won't stay silent while the world around us fractures. I won't become part of the spiral of revenge, manipulation, or killing. I want a real life. A place where you can step into the light, even if only in the smallest steps. Michael stared at me for a long time, then gave a slight nod, not of agreement, but of someone swallowing a deep ache. You do know what you're asking isn't easy? I know. And I don't expect it to happen overnight. I just need to see you begin. After a moment, he walked to the window and stared out at the vast white forest. His voice dropped, not cold anymore, but weary. My whole life I've survived by not trusting the system, not trusting the law. I've lived because I knew when to strike first, when to do what others wouldn't dare. And now you're asking me to change, to believe in a road no one can guarantee is safe. I came to stand beside him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Neither of us has any guarantees, but if you don't at least try, then I'll forever be the only good thing inside a world built wrong. And eventually the weight of that will destroy us both. Michael turned, his gaze softening. You'll stay if I start changing? I nodded. I can't promise I won't be afraid or doubtful, but I'll stay. As long as I see you moving toward the light, even one small step at a time. He touched my cheek, the rough calluses of his palm sending a sharp ache through my chest. I'm not sure I know how. But for you, I'll learn. And in that moment, I knew we had stepped onto an entirely new path, difficult, uncertain, but chosen together. Not escape, not hiding, but facing forward, beginning again with courage and love. Michael spent the entire next morning on the phone, reaching out to old contacts he had avoided for years. He didn't tell me everything, but I could sense the shift in him, real, steady, not an impulse born of fear, but a decision forged from somewhere deep inside. I watched him sit for hours at the old laptop, his brow furrowed, the keys tapping steadily in the quiet cabin that suddenly felt too small for the magnitude of the choices being made. By afternoon, he sat beside me at the kitchen table, still holding a steaming mug, his expression as serious as the night he first told me he needed me. I reached someone I once helped escape that filthy world. He's a lawyer now in New Hampshire, working with an organization that helps people rebuild their lives after serious mistakes. I've arranged a meeting. No commitments yet, but hope. I listened quietly, my fingers tightening faintly around my cup. I also talked to a few men from the old organization, those who are out now. Those like me who grew sick of blood and lawlessness. They can help me withdraw, legitimize the part of my assets that can be saved. But to do that, I'll have to negotiate. I'll have to hand over a few names. I'll have to stand in court and admit what I've done. He paused, his eyes still steady on mine. I'm not sure the sentence will be light. It might be years. It might be probation. But if you're willing to wait, if you're with me, I'll do it. I didn't think he was asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for sympathy either. He was opening a door he'd kept locked his entire life, believing only traps waited on the other side. I stepped closer, placing my hand on the table between us so our eyes met directly. I'll be there. Not because I want you in prison, but because I want you to walk out someday as a man who is truly free, not owing anyone, not living under the shadow of what used to be. He took my hand, and for the first time, since we met, there was no doubt in his eyes. Claire, without you I would never have imagined another way. You showed me there's still a path back that doesn't require surrendering my soul. I smiled softly, tears warming the edge of my vision. Where do we start? By leaving here, he said. This cabin is no longer safe. We'll go to Hartford. There I can meet the lawyer, take the legal steps I need, and you can live without hiding. I nodded. But I'm coming with you, not apart but beside you. And if one day you stand in court, I'll be in the front row. Michael smiled a rare, unguarded smile. I don't deserve that. No one truly deserves grace, I whispered, but everyone deserves the chance to become deserving. We packed the cabin within hours. Every item tucked away in silence, not the silence of uncertainty, but of focus for what lay ahead. When the car rolled out of the snowy forest, I glanced back one last time. The place that had been our shelter and the stage for our deepest turmoil was now only a beginning. Michael reached over and held my hand on the steering wheel. "I can't promise this will be easy, Claire. But I promise I won't turn back." And I knew that no matter how long the road, no matter how sharp the stones, as long as we walked together, every step would matter. We arrived in Hartford on a gray afternoon misted with light rain, the pale sky reflecting off the wet pavement in shifting streaks of streetlight. The city was neither large nor chaotic, just busy enough for two former fugitives to blend in without notice. Michael rented a small third-floor apartment in a quiet neighborhood near Elizabeth Park, where maple trees changed color with the seasons and stone paths wound between the lawns. The apartment was modest but warm, with a small kitchen, a large window overlooking a yard of fallen leaves, and a room Michael immediately claimed as his workspace for documents and legal correspondence. The first days passed in a kind of nameless busyness. I applied to work at a nearby clinic that needed an experienced nurse, especially one who could handle emergencies. No one asked many questions as long as my certifications were valid, and I remained calm when someone fainted in the waiting room during my interview. Michael spent nearly all day on the phone or computer, meeting his lawyer several times a week, and beginning the first file for reintegration under cooperative investigation. He didn't share many details, but I knew he was slowly unraveling each knot of his past. At night we lay beside each other in quiet, not because we lacked words, but because the exhaustion of months spent in fear had not fully lifted. More than once I woke to find him standing outside on the small balcony, lighting a cigarette despite the cold, staring out at the fog and the pale glow of street lamps. He spoke less than he used to, but his eyes no longer carried the same heaviness. He seemed to be learning how to be silent without hiding, how to listen not to danger but to himself. Life in Hartford was steady in a way that felt foreign. I grew accustomed to catching the bus each morning, to the coffee shop on the corner where the older owner always asked, "Almond milk again today?" Michael sometimes cooked dinner simple spaghetti that somehow tasted extraordinary, and we would eat under the soft yellow light of the kitchen, talking about small, ordinary things, as though the past had never chased us. Yet a distance began to form within that peace, not the distance of two people drifting apart, but the distance of two worlds trying to settle over each other too quickly. I worked long days and came home exhausted. Michael sank deeper into paperwork, legal terms, half-coded phone calls that made me nervous but that I didn't want to pry into. Sometimes I felt as though I was living beside a man, gradually dissolving into a silent battle only he fully understood. One evening, when I sat alone in the living room, watching the glow of the streetlights spill across the window, I found myself wondering whether love could fill all these quiet spaces. I didn't doubt his feelings or regret choosing this life beside him, but I realized that loving someone who is changing means learning to accept the possibility that you might have to love a version of them you have never met before. Michael stepped out of the office then, saw me lost in thought, and came to sit beside me, his hand resting gently on mine. "I'm sorry I've not been here as much," he said, his voice honest. "I just want to do this right." I squeezed his hand, offering a small smile. "I don't need you to be perfect, Michael. I just need you to remember we're doing this together." And he nodded, the tension in his eyes softening. In that moment, the distance between us closed just a little, only a little, but enough to make me believe that this new life, with all its quiet and uncertainty, could still become the beginning of something truly lasting. That Friday afternoon, Hartford was draped in its usual gray, a light mist falling over the cold sidewalks as I finished my shift at the clinic and received a brief message from Michael that said only 3 words. "I have to go." No explanation, no time he would return. My heart tightened in that old familiar way, and although I didn't reply, choosing instead to let the screen dim, while reminding myself I had learned how to trust, I still couldn't quiet the thin ribbon of worry that slid under my ribs. Near midnight, Michael came home. His clothes were damp with mist, his coat smeared with a few streaks of mud, yet his eyes carried none of the danger I had once read in them so easily. Instead, there was a solemn heaviness I had never seen before. He slipped off his coat, set it on the chair, and sat beside me on the sofa, silent for a long stretch. I didn't ask anything. I simply waited. Finally he said, "I saw Gabriel." The name was not unfamiliar. Gabriel had once been Michael's right hand in those years underground, a man believed to have died during an internal purge that Michael never described in detail. I turned toward him, listening. "He isn't dead. He disappeared, changed his name, lived in the shadows for years the same way I did." But unlike me, he has no intention of getting out. Michael's voice dropped, his hand curling subconsciously into a fist. He found me and said that if I truly planned to go legal, then I was a traitor. He said he would protect you, protect everything I had, as long as I stayed quiet. I looked at Michael and recognized the battle in his eyes, not one between right and wrong, but between loyalty forged in darker years and the fragile, unpromised life he was trying to build now. What did you tell him? I told him no. Michael lifted his gaze to mine, steady and unshaken. I told him I don't belong to the world anymore, that I would rather lose everything than go back to being a shadow. I took his hand, a mixture of fear and admiration tightening inside me. He went on. Gabriel laughed. He said I was naive. Then he stood up and pulled an envelope from his jacket. Inside were photographs of you going to work, you at the coffee shop, you standing at the bus stop. He told me to remember who really held the knife by the handle. A chill ran through me, not out of fear but from the unsettling knowledge of being exposed, watched, pulled into a war I had never chosen. I told him that if he ever touched you, I wouldn't need the law to end it, and then I let him walk away. The room fell silent again. I rested my head on his shoulder, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat. Do you think he'll come back? Maybe, he whispered. But I also know that was the last time I looked over my shoulder. Gabriel is the final shadow in my life, and I chose to let him go. I wrapped my arms around him, offering no grand speeches, only the kind of embrace that says he will never be alone in this choice. If anything happens, he started. You will not face it alone. He pulled me closer, and in that small, unknown apartment in a strange city, we said goodbye to one last piece of his past, not with hatred, but with resolve. And even though I knew there were still hard days ahead, I also knew that from this moment forward we no longer walked along blurred boundaries. We had chosen, and we would keep that promise. One early spring morning, when the final patches of winter snow had melted into pale streaks on the steps, and the Hartford sky wore a tender blue like a promise of something new, I found a letter waiting on our doorstep. No postmark, no sender's name, only my own written in small, careful handwriting on the front, the ink slightly smudged as if the writer had paused more than once between the strokes. I opened it by the window where the first sunlight softened the remnants of last night's unease. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, smelling faintly of fresh ink, the handwriting strong, decisive, and so familiar my heart recognized it before my eyes reached the name. It was from Michael. Claire, if you are reading this, it means I left the apartment a little earlier than you. Don't worry, nothing bad has happened. I simply needed to go finish the last step of the plan I promised you. Yesterday I met the lawyer one final time. All the documents have been submitted. I have signed the voluntary cooperation agreement and accepted the conditions required to remove my name from the wanted list. I also did something I never believed I would do in my lifetime. I wrote a statement. No excuses, no shifting blame, only the truth. I do not know what the court will decide. It could be a suspended sentence, it could be years, but whatever it is, I chose this path because I want to be worthy of the faith you placed in me, worthy of the life we have been trying to build from scattered pieces. There is a key in this envelope. It belongs to a small house in Vermont near Lake Willoughby. It is not large, but enough for you to plant flowers, have a workspace, and if someday you wish, enough room for a child. I stood before it last week on a trip you knew nothing about. The house is old, but it has a soul, its porch carrying the soft rustle of wind like a greeting. I placed a deposit using the first portion of my cleaned assets. If everything goes well, it will be ours. And if it does not, then at least you will still have a place to begin again, not because you are running from me, but because you deserve a life that continues even when I cannot stand beside you for a while. Claire, words have never been my strength. But I remember every morning you combed your hair in front of the mirror, the way you folded my shirts neatly even when you pretended to throw them, down in anger, the smell of the coffee you prefer, the way you look at the patients you care for, and how you never walk away from what you believe is right. You are the only reason I believe light is not just something people dream about. I am not asking you to wait, but if one day you walk to that house and open the wooden door with this key, and you still think of me, then I will come back with a heart repaired enough to hold you without hurting myself. I love you in my own way, clumsy and slow, but never halfway. Live on, Claire, with or without me. But if with me, then let us live as two people who walked through darkness to find each other. Michael, I folded the letter, my hands trembling, my vision blurred with tears as the world outside the window softened into watery shapes. On the table, the small brass key glowed under the light, like an invitation. Not an ending, a beginning, once again. This time toward a future without fear, without lies, only what is truly worth believing. I reached that house on a summer afternoon, when sunlight poured through the green canopy, and Lake Willoughby lay quiet as a sheet of polished glass. The small home rested along the hillside, its wooden steps worn smooth, its porch brushed with moss, and a modest garden waiting for a pair of hands to tend it. I used the key Michael left, and the door opened slowly, without a creak, carrying only the scent of old wood and new sunlight. Inside was a world without memories, yet full of promise. I stood in the empty living room, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. In that moment, I was no longer the woman who once ran, once trembled, once questioned every choice. I was someone choosing. Not choosing between one person and another, between past or future, but choosing love, choosing trust, choosing a life shaped by what the heart knows is worthy. I didn't know how long it would take for Michael to return. It could be months, it could be years, it could be longer still, but I knew that for the first time in his life, he was walking in the right direction, and if love began our story, faith would carry it forward. Our story was not perfect, not glamorous, not like the ones in romance novels, but it was real. Real like the scar across Michael's back, real like the tears I shed through sleepless nights, real like the laughter that escaped him for the first time after years spent in darkness. And maybe that is what life tries to remind us. That love is not always easy, not always timely, but when it arrives and you are brave enough to hold on to it, it can rewrite a person from the inside out. We made no promise of a future without pain. We only promised to live honestly, to choose each other every day, whether separated by miles or reaching across the kitchen table. And now, I want to hear your heart. What do you feel about this story? Did it remind you of someone in your own life? Have you ever stood between love and fear, between what was and what might be? Share with us in the comments below. We hope to read your heartfelt reflections. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video if the story touched you. Our channel will continue bringing real-life stories filled with emotion, healing, and the deep lessons of love, trust, and transformation. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I wish you health, peace, happiness, and the strength to always find the light within your own life. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.